The city lights sparkled below as Michael leaned back in his penthouse, fingers drumming against the chilled glass of bourbon. From the outside, his life was perfect, an empire built from code, luxury cars, and a bank account that never seemed to run dry. But beneath the surface, loneliness clung to him like a shadow. Genuine connections were rare, buried under layers of false smiles, and people who saw him as nothing more than a ticket to their dreams. That's why, on a night where silence felt heavier than usual, he found himself scrolling through a peculiar website, one that offered companionship, no strings attached. It wasn't about the money for him. It was about filling the void, if only temporarily. Amidst the polished profiles of models and influencers, one picture made him pause. Her name was Emily. No filters, no designer clothes, just a simple girl with tired eyes and a shy smile. The kind of eyes that had seen too much, too soon. Intrigued, Michael sent a message. Emily was barely getting by. Between balancing 2 jobs and an avalanche of bills, her dreams of finishing school felt like a distant memory. When Michael's offer landed in her inbox, $10,000 a month to pose as his girlfriend, it sounded like a lifeline. All she had to do was attend events, share a few laughs, and pretend, just for a little while, that she belonged in his world of glitter and glass. Desperation won over pride, and she agreed. Their first meeting was awkward. Michael, used to confidence and charm, stumbled over his words, surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. Emily, meanwhile, focused on keeping her hands from trembling, overwhelmed by the opulence of his world. But as weeks passed, the lines between their roles blurred. Their laughter came easier, and late-night conversations stretched longer. Michael found himself sharing pieces of his past he'd long locked away, stories of a childhood spent in hand-me-down clothes, and a mother who worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Emily listened, not with pity, but understanding, for the first time. In years, Michael felt seen, but Emily had secrets of her own, shadows she kept hidden behind soft smiles and polite laughter. Sometimes, Michael caught glimpses of it, the way her eyes darkened when the conversation strayed too close to home, or how she flinched at the sound of her own phone ringing. He pushed the thoughts aside, chalking it up to nerves or the adjustment to a world so different from hers. Yet a nagging voice warned that there was more to her story, something she wasn't saying. Their arrangement was supposed to be simple. 3 months, no feelings, no complications. But it was never that easy. Michael found himself waiting for her texts, seeking her out at parties, just to steal a moment alone. Emily, despite herself, started to forget the script, catching herself laughing for real, her hand lingering in his a second too long. The nights grew warmer, conversations softer, and the distance between them shorter. Just as Michael began to wonder if there could be something real between them, Emily disappeared. No calls, no messages. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and the apartment he'd rented for her stood dark and empty. Confusion twisted it into anger, then concern. With every unanswered call, unease gnawed at him. His security team found nothing. No accidents reported, no traces. It was as if she'd never existed at all. And then, a week later, a small brown envelope arrived at his office, addressed in Emily's careful handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. Emily, standing with a man Michael didn't recognize. Her smile strained and eyes hollow. No note, no explanation, just that haunting image. Michael stared at the photo, a cold chill spreading through him. He had all the resources in the world, yet, in that moment, he felt powerless. The woman he thought he was starting to know was a stranger. her past a locked door he had no key to. But he wasn't about to let it end there. Michael couldn't tear his eyes away from the photograph. The man beside Emily looked rough around the edges, faded tattoos peeking from under his sleeves, a smirk that seemed permanently carved into his face. But it was Emily's expression that haunted him. The spark that usually lit her eyes was gone, replaced by a numbness that Michael couldn't reconcile with the girl who laughed at his terrible jokes and stayed up late to watch movies with him. He gripped the photo tighter, frustration boiling beneath his skin. How could he have missed it? Days turned to weeks, and Michael's search for Emily bordered on obsession. He paid private investigators, more than most people made in a year, combed through her past, her friends, anyone who might know where she'd gone, but every lead circled back to the same dead ends. The only thing they uncovered was a hospital record from 3 years ago. A broken wrist, no police report. The implication hung in the air, heavy and sickening. Michael's jaw clenched at the thought. Who was this man? And what kind of hold did he have on her? Meanwhile, Emily was 1,000 miles away, staring out of a grimy motel window. The man. From the photo, Tyler paced the room behind her, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and dangerous. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every word he hissed. She hugged her knees, willing herself invisible. The escape plan she'd rehearsed 100 times felt flimsy now. The hope she'd carried, crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. Tyler's debts ran deep, and Emily was the only card he had left to play. Leaving Michael was supposed to protect him. She'd seen what Tyler was capable of. The threats, the fists that left bruises for weeks. Michael, with his guarded smiles and warm eyes, didn't belong in that world. The money Tyler demanded was wired the day after she vanished, $50,000 gone in seconds. The guilt twisted in her stomach every time she thought of it. Michael would never know why she left, only that she took the money and ran. Maybe that was better. At least he'd stay away. But Michael wasn't the type to let things go. The sleepless nights started to show in the dark circles beneath his eyes, in the way he snapped at employees and skipped meetings. The people closest to him saw the cracks forming, but no one dared to ask. All that mattered was finding Emily. He owed her that much. An explanation, a chance to fight for her if she'd let him. Eventually a break came in the form of a security camera outside a gas station in a small town, miles from the city. Emily's face, pale and tired, flashed across the screen. Michael didn't hesitate. Within hours, he was in his car, speeding down unfamiliar highways, jaw set and hands gripping the wheel, tight enough to turn his knuckles white. He played the last voicemail Emily had left him on repeat, clinging to the sound of her voice, searching for anything he might have missed. When he pulled up to the rundown motel at the edge of town, heart pounding, he almost didn't recognize her. Emily stood outside one of the rooms, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. But before Michael could call out, Tyler emerged, hand clamping around her wrist with bruising force. Michael's vision went red. Tyler's eyes narrowed the moment he spotted Michael striding across the lot. "You've got the wrong place, buddy," he sneered, pulling Emily closer. But Emily's eyes met Michael's for a fraction of a second, wide and pleading. That was all it took. Let her go. Michael's voice was cold, steadier than he felt, but Tyler's grin only widened, fingers digging into Emily's arm, hard enough to draw a wince. And if I don't, the next few moments were a blur. Raised voices, a scuffle, Emily's scream splitting the air. It ended with Tyler on the ground, lips split and eyes murderous. Emily trembled in Michael's arms, her breaths coming quick and shallow. For a second, Neither of them moved, the world narrowing to the warmth of her against him, and the way her fingers clung to his shirt. But it wasn't over. Tyler pushed to his feet, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth with a smirk that sent chills down Michael's spine. "You really think it's that easy?" he taunted. "You don't know what you're getting into." And from the way Emily's grip tightened, Michael knew Tyler wasn't bluffing. There were more pieces to this puzzle, darker corners he hadn't uncovered yet. The fight was just beginning. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay steady, his arm still protectively around Emily. Tyler's smirk didn't falter. Even with blood staining his teeth, the warning in his eyes was clear. This wasn't just about money. It was a game, one Tyler didn't plan on losing. Emily's fingers trembled in Michael's grasp, her eyes darting between him and Tyler with a desperation that cut straight through him. "We have to go," she whispered, voice barely audible. Michael didn't need to be told twice. Keeping one arm around her, he led her to his car, half expecting Tyler to grab her back. But Tyler only laughed, a low, menacing sound that echoed long after they sped out of the parking lot. For a while, the only sounds in the car were Emily's shaky breaths and the tires humming against the asphalt. Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel, questions swirling through his mind, but he bit them back, giving her space to breathe. They didn't stop until they reached a small diner miles outside town, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. Inside, over 2 untouched cups of coffee, the truth came spilling out. Emily stared at her hands, voice raw and uneven as she spoke of debts and threats, of nights spent flinching at every shadow. Tyler hadn't always been like this, she explained, eyes distant. They'd grown up in the same neighborhood, kids trying to outrun a future that seemed written in stone. But somewhere along the way, Tyler's desperation had turned dangerous, his love into something dark and suffocating. When he started borrowing from the wrong people, it spiraled fast. By the time Emily realized how deep he was in, it was too late. He'd made it clear. If she left, others would pay the price. Michael listened, jaw clenched, and anger simmering beneath the surface. The thought of Emily, alone and terrified, twisted something in his chest. But guilt crept in too. He should have seen it. The way her eyes darted over her shoulder at crowded parties, the walls she built around certain parts of her past. He'd been so focused on keeping his own secrets that he'd missed hers completely. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was getting her out, for good. Over the next few days, Michael pulled every string he could. The money Tyler owed was staggering, but it wasn't the kind that could be paid off with a check. These were the kind of people who dealt in power, in leverage, the kind who didn't just want their money back. They wanted a lesson taught. Michael's connections got him a meeting with the ones pulling Tyler's strings, a deal made behind closed doors. Tyler would be dealt with, his debts wiped clean, on one condition: Emily would disappear, no ties, no traces. It wasn't the ending Michael wanted, but it was the only way to keep her safe. When he told Emily, her eyes glistened with something, between relief and heartbreak. They spent one last night together in the safety of his penthouse, words coming slow and heavy, hands finding each other in the dark. Neither of them mentioned the morning, the plane ticket waiting on the kitchen counter, or the goodbye hanging between them. When dawn broke, Emily stood by the door, suitcase in hand, shadows clinging beneath her eyes. Michael's throat tightened, but he forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You'll be safe," he promised, voice cracking. Emily's eyes searched his, memorizing every detail. And for a moment, it seemed like she might stay, but she only nodded, lips pressing into a shaky smile. "Thank you," she whispered, the words thick with everything she couldn't say. And then she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the ghost of her smile and the scent of lavender lingering in the air. In the months that followed, Michael threw himself into work, nights bleeding into days with no pause. The emptiness of the penthouse felt suffocating at first, but he forced himself to ignore it, to focus on anything else. Occasionally, he found himself scrolling back through old photos, fingers pausing over that shy smile and those tired eyes. But he never called, never searched. He'd made a promise, and he meant to keep it. Then, one grey morning, a small envelope appeared in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single postcard. No words, just a picture of a lighthouse overlooking the ocean. But it was the handwriting on the back that made Michael's breath catch. The way the corners curled just slightly, as if it had been tucked in someone's pocket for too long. For the first time in months, Michael smiled. It wasn't much, just a sign that she was safe, that she hadn't forgotten, and maybe, someday, it would be more. For now, it was enough.